Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 49. Inversion of Truth. Cazador opened his eyes, looking even more like Ichigo than usual with one of his trademarked scowls adorning his face. Great, so Ichigo's fighting some embodiment of Hell Reiatsu. I bet he's giving it everything he's got, and I'm not there. Fuck, that's just not fair. Why does some stupid poser get to fight Ichigo right off the bat when I had to wait for Ichigo to get his shit together? You better win in there, Ichigo, I've got a bone to pick with you. Growling, Cazador stood. Tosen still appeared to be meditating, so he turned to the still-sitting wizard and pointed at Shinji. Oi, you, come here. The hollow that was once Shinji rose and walked to Cazador calmly. Not sure this is gonna work, but I'm gonna give you a direct order and I expect you to follow it. You don't, I heard you. Understood. There was no response. Cazador didn't really expect one, though he privately felt it would have been nice. Seal your resurrection, he commanded. The ivory robe that Shinji sported began to melt and coalesce, retracting as though being vacuumed up into the center of his chest. His skin, too, returned to the same pale complexion as Cazador himself, and then his mask retracted and shifted, leaving nothing covering his face, but instead a circlet that wrapped around his forehead, with a short flowing hood reaching down to cover his neck. Shinji's clothes had changed somewhat in his transition from wizard to Arrancar. Like Cazador, he wore loose leggings, though his were the same shade of yellow as his resurrection skin. He was also dressed in a simple long-sleeved shirt of similar color, though it looked slightly loose. Finally, Sakanade materialized in a flash of Reiatsu, and Shinji's hollow snagged it in midair, before apparently sheathing it behind him in a similar way to Cazador's Zangetsu. Ah, the Arrancar sighed in relief. Thanks, Cazador de la Luna, right? Cazador nodded. And you are? Shinji's hollow shrugged. I don't have a name. Cazador frowned. That's not right. I learned my name after beating Ichigo for the first time. Well, I haven't exactly beaten Shinji, ya know, Hollow Shinji replied easily, looking around. He let me have control to keep us alive when everyone else went berserk. It's also the reason I hadn't left Resurrection. Since Hell forced it, and we hadn't earned it, neither of us were in control. Or at least, that's how Sakanade explained it. Cazador rubbed his brow. He was getting answers, but damn it, Ichigo was better at this than he was. Give me a fight and I'm good. Otherwise, leave it to Ichigo. So you can't use Resurrection until you beat Shinji. Yeah, Hollow Shinji sighed and scratched his head absently. Something about Shinji still being the owner of the body, and how until I've beaten him down like he did me then I can't rightfully call on the power that he earned from me. Great, Cazador muttered sarcastically. Let me get everyone else back to normal and then we can have this discussion as a group. Everyone, cancel your Resurrection. A flare of Reiatsu later, and there stood 8 fully conscious Arrancar. Before they could even begin to speak, though, Cazador cleared his throat. I'm sure y'all have questions, he acknowledged. I'll get to them as soon as I can, but right now we got a problem. I'm going to assume that all of your inner Shinigami are paying attention. There was a murmur of agreement, so Cazador nodded. Basically, it turns out that Hell is a person bent on conquering the various worlds, Living World, Hueco Mundo, Soul Society, the lot of them. We got some experience with that, Aizen and all, right? How's this for a twist? Hell can't be killed, his dimension resurrects him every time. And he's got anyone who dies in Hell as his slaves. And just because our luck sucks that much, he's probably got an army of evil freaks just yearning to get a second chance to wreak havoc. So Soul Society's pretty much rescinded all the laws that may or may not apply to us. We'll be protecting the living world for the most part, but that means you all need to be at full strength. Bankai and Resurrection, same as me. Am I right in thinking none of you know your names? Nods from his audience prompted one from Cazador as well. We don't have time for all 3 of your soul aspects to learn how to trust each other. We can't do this the long way, Ichigo's way, anymore. Now it's time to do it my way. And what way is that? Hollow Hiyori demanded aggressively. Cazador smirked, and flared his Reiatsu, a black and red Getsuga-like aura raging around his form as he raised his ivory Zanpakuto to his favorite position. The fun way. Tear the sky asunder, Zangetsu. Oh, shit, Hollow Rose cursed, eyes white as Reiatsu-infused smoke erupted from Cazador. Hollow Love gave Hollow Hiyori a very dark look. You just had to ask, didn't you? Finally, the smoke cleared, and Cazador was in his Resurrection form. He swung Tensa Zangetsu to the side carelessly, the pressure behind the swing crushing an enormous boulder a few dozen yards away to dust. This is your test. Get those swords out, kiddies, it's time for Uncle Cazador to give you a lesson in pain. Hitsugaya felt the reverberations of an ongoing battle underneath them and sighed before taking another sip of the tea Urahara had been gracious enough to offer. No doubt, Cazador is training the Vizard and Tosen in Resurrection. Trust a part of Ichigo's soul not to waste time and just get to the point. Perhaps I should do the same. For the last several minutes, Hitsugaya had been thinking about something that would surely scandalize Yamamoto Sotaicho. But this was not the time to waffle about decisions. Urahara-san, I request training for myself and my comrades for the duration of our stay in Karakura. Urahara blinked, genuinely surprised for a moment. Why would you seek training from this lowly shopkeeper? He asked after a moment. You trained Ichigo. He went from no powers at all, to being able to beat me in less than a month. Yoruichi-san continued the training, and he was capable of fighting Kuchiki Taicho in Bankai less than a week later, Renji pointed out. Now granted he has hollow powers, and we don't want that for ourselves, Hitsugaya cut in quickly, forestalling Urahara's obvious reply. However, we will shortly be fighting Togabito who have been training in hell for Kami knows how long, and resurrect endlessly in hell to be sent out to fight again. We need all the advantages we can gain, all the power that can be mustered. You were almost a match for Aizen, even after he began evolving with the Hogyoku, Rukia added. So, really, who else would we ask? Ichigo. Renji could not hold back a snort. The strawberry's good at fighting, I'll give him that, but the only reason he got as strong as he did was. Stop. Renji fell silent at Urahara's quiet, but powerful command. I am not to praise, or blame, for Ichigo's rapid growth to power. Yes, I admit, I gave him the tools he needed, but all three of you know the path to power. Communing with your Zanpakuto, he answered, looked at Rukia pointedly, expanding your repertoire of usable techniques. That part seemed to be directed towards Renji, who looked abashed. And experience. The final words were directed towards Hitsugaya, who looked on icily. Ichigo earned every last drop of his power. He gained Shikai of his own volition. He chose the shorter, infinitely harder path of gaining Bankai where had he failed there is every chance he would have died, and even after succeeding using it damaged himself. He became the first Vizard to ever gain Resurrection by taking unbelievable risks with his own soul and identity. He was able to kill Aizen after being forced to make a horrific choice, and finding it within him to sacrifice still more of something precious to him. So don't you dare sully his sufferings and achievements by painting him as a product of what I did to him. Urahara glared at the three before him. If you want strength, get it the right way. Earn it, from your Zanpakuto, and from yourself. I refuse to train you. And even had I wanted to, I have little time. I am extremely busy preparing for the invasion and performing research on the Togabito Reiatsu samples I have. Hitsugaya Taicho nodded, giving Renji a cold glare for a moment. Thank you for your time. With your permission, we would like to wait for Inoue-san, Sato-san and Ishida-san to arrive so we may work out accommodations. Urahara waved dismissively as he rose and retreated to his secret back room where he was performing his experiments. As soon as he left, Rukia smacked Renji upside the head, hard. Ow, idiot, fool, of all the things you could have said, you had to imply that Ichigo didn't earn his power. To his credit, Renji did look ashamed. Sorry, it's just a bit frustrating. We've all been at this for decades if not centuries, for far longer than Ichigo's even been alive. We've all worked hard, so it just feels so worthless when along comes Ichigo. 1 year, one lousy year, he went from human with spiritual energy to, what? An ascended Vizard with both Bankai and Resurrection, capable of owning each and every one of us in a fight. What makes him so special? He's still alive, Hitsugaya answered quietly. Humans have a short lifespan, remember. Less than a century, usually. They're forced to grow and adapt quickly, whereas we with our millennia-long life cannot. Every year feels to him like a decade or two feels to you. Renji wasn't entirely sure how to feel about that. On one hand, it meant that Ichigo would continue to grow stronger with his all-too-human growth rate, leaving everyone else in the dust. On the other hand, it also meant that it wasn't any fault of Renji's that left him lacking the power to keep up. Not that I'm going to let that stop me from trying to catch up, he thought furiously to himself. Frowning, he shook his head to clear it. We should get going. I don't want to get caught up in that fight downstairs. Are you sure? Hitsugaya asked unexpectedly, looking at Renji with an inscrutable expression. I will be joining them shortly. Urahara was correct, I do lack the experience of my fellow Taicho. Fighting a variety of opponents simultaneously will help tremendously. Renji shook his head negatively. My problem is that I have very few tricks up my sleeve. My Bankai has all of 3 techniques to attack: smash with its head and body, slice with its spines, or blast with Hakatsu Teiho. Urahara was right about me too, I need to learn some variety. I was hoping Rukia would help me with Kido, if I help her get started on Bankai. Rukia did a double take, looking at her longtime friend incredulously. Me, Bankai. Yes, you, Bankai, Renji asserted firmly. You'll need to increase your Raryoku reserves a lot, but just the process of learning Bankai will make you stronger in other ways as well. I learned how to use Higa Zeko while training for Bankai. You might learn another dance from Sota no Shirayuki. Shi no Mai, Rukia whispered. Yes, Rukia, the last and greatest of my dances, Sota no Shirayuki murmured within her soul, her voice sounding as though it were carried along an icy wind to Rukia's ears alone. But to learn it, you must put your life on the line. Are you prepared to risk everything? If Rukia was honest, she had to admit that she's simultaneously excited and terrified of the prospect. Shinigami who achieved Bankai were rare for a reason. Not only was there a significant Raryoku requirement, but there was nearly always a danger to the prospective wielder's life. To achieve domination over one's Zanpakuto spirit was no small thing. There were cases where failure to achieve Bankai had soured the relationship between Shinigami and Zanpakuto to the point where even Shikai was no longer accessible. Admittedly, Rukia had daydreamed of reaching Bankai for years, decades. But even in those fantasies, she was far older, admittedly a little taller, facing her brother in a spar. Byakuya ni-sama would release his grip of Senbon Sakura, and his Zanpakuto would melt into the ground to unveil the rows of enormous blades that shatter into his Bankai. Bankai, Senbon Sakura Kujiyoshi. And then Rukia, dressed in the fine clothes of the Kuchiki, would take a pose. What pose? She'd never been able to make up her mind. And call out her own Bankai, Sota no Shirayuki's pure white ribbon twisting and twirling around her dramatically as her blade began to warp into a Bankai worthy of the most beautiful sword in Soul Society. But those had been mere dreams, idle thoughts that she had thought had no base in reality. Her levels of Raryoku had never been the greatest, unlike Ichigo's or Renji's, and she'd honestly never considered herself strong enough to even aim for that height of power. Could she really reach it? Rukia took one look at Renji, who was looking at her with utter confidence, as if he could see something in her that she herself could not. That steadied her resolve, and gave her courage. Then let us train, Renji. Show me the way to Bankai, and I will teach you Kido. Leaning against the wall just beside the door from the other room, Urahara smiled, tipping his hat over his eyes as he silently moved away. When Hitsugaya entered the basement to enter the fray, he was taken aback at the situation. The Vizard-turned-Arrancar were all teaming up against Cazador de la Luna. Yet Ichigo's hollow stood his ground easily, without even a scratch, while several of the Arrancar were panting, sweating and bleeding. Shinji's left arm hung uselessly from his shoulder, which bled profusely, while Hiyori was doubled over in pain, clutching her stomach. Toshiro took a moment to consider his options, and then decided to sit and wait. It was always wise to study your opponent's fighting styles, and while he'd seen Ichigo's, he was curious how Cazador de la Luna deviated from Ichigo in combat styles. Is that all? Cazador taunted. You'll never beat me like this. Kensai. Hiyori, cover me. Shinji barked, spinning Sakanade quickly. No one was bothering with adding hollow to their names anymore. Using their Shinigami names, everyone knew who was being addressed anyway. Everyone else, keep him occupied. On it, Kensai replied, flashing in front of Shinji with a burst of Sonido, charging Tachika's with his Reiatsu. Cazador laughed. You think I'm going to give you the time to confuse my senses? Getsuga Tensho. Everyone jumped or Sonido ed well out of the way of the enormous Getsuga, except Shinji and Kensai. Kensai's Zanpakuto glowed brightly for a second before he thrust it in front of him, unleashing a large energy blast, deflecting the Getsuga just enough to miss everyone. Hurry it up, Shinji. He bit out. I don't have many more of those left in me. I just need a few more seconds. Too bad. Cazador materialized right behind Shinji with the low sonic boom of Sonido, snagging Sakanade in mid-revolution and halting its spinning. Easily, carelessly, he snapped the Zanpakuto in half and kicked Shinji into a nearby boulder, which crumbled around him. You don't have that long. Shinji, Hiyori cried, rushing Cazador with her Kubikiri Orochi, only for Cazador to smirk. A moment later, all the Arankar stood in shock. Cazador hadn't even bothered to block with Tensa Zangetsu. A single finger had been all he put up, and Kubikiri Orochi was halted instantly. Ha, now I get why Aizen did that to Ichigo. Cazador cackled. The stupid looks on your faces are hilarious. You've got to be kidding, Lisa muttered. A finger, are we that much weaker than him? Damn it, Hiyori cursed, backing off to hopefully form a better plan than, just cut his damn head off. He's too powerful. Oi, Kubikiri, what do I gotta do for Resurrection? You must earn back the right to your hollow power. That would mean taking it from Hiyori. Fuck that, I refuse to let that strawberry get away with blocking us with one finger. Earn, nothing, I'll give it to you. Take your power, hollow, and make him bleed. Hollow Hiyori was suddenly rooted in place as a strange sensation within her suddenly grew. She could feel her hollow power skyrocketing as inner Hiyori drew her hollow mask. Thanks, Hiyori, she said aloud, the telltale hollow echo catching everyone's attention as she flared her Reiatsu as high as it would go. Let's kick his ass together. Chop cleanly, Kubikiri Orochi. The dust and dirt kicked up from the fight so far spun around crazily, obscuring Hiyori from vision for a few moments, but when it settled she was back in her Resurrection form from hell, with one minor difference. Her mask was largely gone. Now only the horn remained, though diamond tattoos had appeared on her cheeks. Once again, she still had no Zanpakuto, but Hiyori could feel the raw power in her veins just aching to be unleashed. Let's try this again, she challenged. Cazador's grin grew larger and far more bloodthirsty. That's more like it. Glad to see at least one of you learned the damn lesson. Stabbing Tensa Zangetsu into the ground next to him, he rushed at Hiyori to fight claw to claw. A flurry of exchanges later, Hiyori was sent flying into an enormous boulder hundreds of feet away, sending it crumbling around her. Don't you dare look down on me! Hiyori screamed, flaring her Reiatsu, blasting away the rubble with a cry. Crossing her arms, she gripped the blade-like protrusions from her elbows and snapped them off before rushing at Cazador once again. Cazador suddenly appeared behind her in the sonic boom of Sonido and kicked her in the back, once again sending her flying. Too slow, Hiyori-chan. Hiyori bounced on the floor a few times, clutching her makeshift weapons desperately. Getting to her feet wearily, she took one look at Cazador, who was still completely unharmed. Damn it! Angrily hurling the blades at Cazador, she was taken aback when they suddenly transformed into cobra-looking snakes as large as she was. The cobras hissed angrily, hoods flared out and jaws unhinged, ready to take huge chunks out of Cazador's hide. Dodging quickly, Cazador took stock on the new situation. You have got to be kidding me, he complained, taking a moment to Sonido behind one and rip it to shreds with his sharp claws. I haven't learned any of my unique hollow abilities yet, and you get one in the first few minutes. I can't really be surprised by that, Shinji said loudly from a small distance away, Reiatsu oozing into the air around him in visible wisps as his Zanpakuto repaired itself. You've never needed your unique abilities, not with your deal with Ichigo. You both are far more comfortable with swinging Zangetsu around, and even without your blade you're faster and stronger than us. You've never been pressed into needing anything more since you achieved Resurrection. He gave a toothy grin, and suddenly his voice regained its hollow echo. You're surprisingly subtle, though, despite all that. Nice lesson, making us invert everything to gain our power back. But Sakanade taught Shinji and I more about reflections than you'll ever know. Collapse, Sakanade. His Zanpakuto suddenly, for lack of a better word, unraveled, transforming into one very long ivory cloth that spun around Shinji rapidly, obscuring him from view before settling down into the sleeveless robe that he had worn in hell. His circlet, the mask remnant from his pre-resurrection state, had grown a single upward curved protrusion in the center, but otherwise remained unchanged. Hey, Cazador chuckled, telekinetically summoning Tensa Zangetsu back into his hand with a mental call. Now things are starting to get interesting. Yes they are. Cazador stumbled in shock, then held up a hand. Hold on, Ichigo's back. Shinji, Hiyori, spar with the others and try to make them understand what you figured out. The two nodded in acquiescence as Cazador Sonido at a fair distance away and sealed his resurrection. A few moments later, he entered his inner world. Ichigo was standing next to Zangetsu, arms crossed and his perpetual frown on his face. So, I see you finished up with your new doppelganger, Cazador observed with a smirk. Yeah, took a bit longer than I expected, but it's finished. I need control of my body again, and we don't have time to fight this time. Cazador grinned. Glad to have you back, King. Don't worry about the fight, we're about to get into the fight of a lifetime. I'll fill you in as you go. Ichigo nodded as he took control of his body again. Feeling it shift from Arankar to Vizard once more, he opened his eyes and began to move. He half listened to Cazador telling him what all had happened in the interim, but in truth, all Ichigo was interested in was getting to Yuzu and Masaki. He'd spent a few moments poring over his hollow side's recent memories when he'd awoken in the inner world, so he knew where to go. Oi, Kurosaki, Hitsugaya called out. Not now, Toshiro. Busy, Ichigo said tersely. Not bothering with climbing the ladder leading up to Urahara's shop, he merely leapt straight up to the top and entered the shop. Ah, Ichigo-kun, you're back, Urahara greeted warmly. Urahara, Ichigo acknowledged. Take me to them. The shopkeeper's smile faltered, before he dipped his head, allowing his hat to shadow his face. All right, can you actually break the chains? Yes. Seemingly reassured by Ichigo's surety, Urahara led him into a back room, where Hachigen was meditating and apparently maintaining what appeared to be a complex set of barriers. Hachigen, let us in, Urahara requested. Without opening his eyes, Hachi nodded and a man-sized door appeared in the barriers, allowing Ichigo access. He quickly made his way to his mother and sister, quietly assessing how they looked. They look dead. They were both pale, and neither was breathing. It made Ichigo's heart ache. This is my fault. Yamamoto said they were trapped. Not in hell so they can't revive, but neither can they be saved. Does that mean that we have to bring them to hell for them to be revived, before I break the chains? Perhaps Urahara would be the better one to ask. Ichigo quickly repeated his question for Urahara, who looked uncertain. I'm afraid I have no data, Ichigo-kun. They may revive after you break the chains, or they may simply deteriorate as spirits do after death. However, the chances of Yamamoto Sotaicho allowing you to take them to hell are slim at best. Has Inoue been in to try to reject their being taken by hell? Yes, I tried, Kurosaki-kun, Inoue's voice suddenly sounded, as she walked into the room, her voice and expression sorrowful. The hell chains are too powerful. Even if you were to lend me your power using medical Kido, it would be too dangerous. Somehow the chains have become part of their being, rejecting them outright would damage their souls. If you can remove the chains, I might be able to revive them, but to bring them back from death might be beyond even my powers. I don't know, and I don't think you want to run that risk on your family, Kurosaki-kun. Damn it, Ichigo cursed, turning back to his family and kneeling next to them. I'm sorry, Yuzu, Mom. I can't save you yet. But I will. Kurosaki-kun, Inoue asked with uncertainty in her tone. The Barine family had the knowledge to send souls to hell. They'll have the knowledge of how to save them, the Vizard declared, standing up and striding out of the barrier. Ichigo, the Barine family is working with us now, Urahara quickly informed him. I'm not sure what all you've been informed of. Hell is a person, made the dimension. His soul was shattered a long time ago by the Spirit King, now he's back and is probably going to go to war with us, Ichigo summarized succinctly. I see, so you're already aware. The Barin family has already shared its knowledge, and we have 3 Taicho going over their records for any useful information. Ichigo paused. Who? Yukataki Taicho, Kyoraku Taicho, Kuchiki Taicho. The Transcendent sighed. I guess I can trust them. Ichigo, there is one other way. Hell said he would trade them for 2 souls who are equally pure. King, are you really going to consider that option? For once, Cazador sounded unsure. For my family, I will do anything, Cazador. Anything. Chapter 50. Ice and Snow. Ichigo sighed as he sat, watching the hollow versions of the Vizard spar. They'd learned Cazador's lesson well enough, it appeared. All of them were now in Resurrection, and looked very similar to how they'd been in Hell, with the exception that their masks didn't cover the entirety of their faces. For instance, Kensai's mask didn't quite reach his eyes, but instead guarded his mouth and nose. Mashiro's was relatively hilarious, leaving her with naught but bone-like feelers atop her head, much to the amusement of Rose, whose own mask remnant was his enormous beak. Luckily for the pianist, the beak had shifted down to be a large ornament on a bone necklace. Love's mask seemed to have combined with his sunglasses to an extent, leaving him with a set of oni horns and shades. Lisa, who was the last to achieve resurrection, had kept all of her mask except the part covering her eyes, giving her a dangerous night-looking visage. All in all, so far it looked like the hollow and Shinigami aspects of the Vizard were cooperating well. But it's not enough. The minute one of them feels they could do better in control, they'll fight and weaken themselves. This is just a patch job. Maybe, but look, no one has lost Resurrection yet. The Shinigami are just as curious about the hollow forms as their hollows are. That's a good sign, right? Maybe, Ichigo conceded. Regardless, it was about the best that they could hope for in such a short time. There was no way to force true trust between the Vizard and their inner hollows, and trust was needed in order to work together. To make them fight for control over each other's blades now would shatter whatever trust was building. The Transcendent turned his attention to T-Asen, who hadn't moved an inch since Cazador had told him what steps he'd skipped. There was no way to tell what was going on, as it was obvious that Tosen was in his inner world. All in all, there was little he could do. Kurosaki. Or perhaps not. Toshiro, Ichigo acknowledged, turning around to look at the diminutive Taicho who was walking towards him. Hitsugaya stopped several feet away. Would you care for a spar? Just what the doctor ordered, Cazador quipped. This'll alleviate the boredom. Ichigo offered a half smirk. Why not? He got up and stretched, popping his neck and rubbing his right shoulder a little to loosen it up. Is Bankai against Bankai acceptable? Hitsugaya inquired steadily, not revealing how nervous he was to be challenging someone who was, frankly, far beyond his level of power. Works for me. Drawing Zangetsu, black and red Reiatsu rushed from the tip down to engulf Ichigo, wordlessly entering Bankai. The long chain of Tensa Zangetsu wrapped around his right arm and hung from his shoulder, ready to be used for anything Ichigo could think up. Bankai. Daiguren Hyarinmaru, Hitsugaya announced, donning his own Bankai form, complete with ice wings, claws and talons. They stared at each other for a few seconds, before each leapt back and swung their blades at each other horizontally. Getsuga Tensho. Hyoryu Senbi. The Getsuga met a wave of flowing and regenerating ice, cutting into it with all the raging power of Ichigo's Reiatsu before cutting through a few seconds later. But Hitsugaya wasn't there anymore. Hitsugaya flickered into existence several meters away, behind and to the left side of Ichigo. Guncho Sarara. Ichigo merely extended his left arm, and suddenly the chain dangling from his shoulder leapt into action, flying between the ice daggers and himself, catching them easily. He allowed a smirk to appear on his face. As I once told Kenpachi, there's more to my sword than just the blade. And there's more to mine than merely ranged ice attacks, Hitsugaya rebutted, rushing at Ichigo in a straight charge, raising Daiguren Hyarinmaru above his head for a downward slash. Ichigo raised Tensa Zangetsu instantly, blocking Daiguren Hyarinmaru's slash with only one arm. Too easy. He fired off a roundhouse kick that connected with Hitsugaya's protective wing. The wing broke, but it had successfully muffled the impact to its owner. Hitsugaya was sent hurtling into another boulder with his side bruised, but nothing broken, but not before Ichigo felt a sharp pain in the leg he'd kicked with. Ichigo looked down, startled, and found that his leg, which was not protected by his Bankai coat, had been stabbed, and ice was starting to creep down to his foot. It was already beginning to go numb. Sneaky. He must have used his tail while I was preoccupied with his sword, Ichigo realized as he swiftly chopped the ice off his leg with a precise slash from Tensa Zangetsu. Bakudo 61. Raikujokuro. Hitsugaya cried from directly only meters behind him, giving Ichigo no time to dodge as 6 wide beams of light slammed into his midsection. Cursing his own arrogance, how could I forget I was still fighting with these seals on? The wizard scowled and switched his Reiatsu to its more evolved state, flaring his Reiatsu throughout his body to burn out the connections the Kido had upon him. As expected, the binding spell shattered, just in time for Ichigo to shunpo out of the way of 3 dragon-headed ice streams that Hitsugaya had launched mere moments before. You want to play like that? Fine then. Ichigo viciously slashed at Hitsugaya, sending a silent Getsuga only the size of his own body at the ice user. The Getsuga screamed at a suddenly wide-eyed Hitsugaya, who was barely able to shunpo out of the way before Ichigo materialized behind him and sent him rocketing to the ground with a well-placed elbow to the back, snapping off the ice tail in the process. Hitsugaya flared out his ice wings, slowing his descent enough for him to regain control over his own momentum, before flipping around with narrowed eyes as he used the water in the air to regenerate his tail. Dangerous to approach in melee, but his Getsuga is too fast for ranged. I need a distraction. A sound and resulting flash of a Sero, seen out of the corner of his eye, reminded him that even if he wanted to use his Bankai's greatest power, he could not for fear of crippling his allies. No matter, I have an alternative. Ichigo looked around cautiously, not having been engaged by Hitsugaya for several seconds now. He's up to something. He knew that Hitsugaya was alive. The icy Reiatsu in the air was enough to be assured of that at least, but he was hiding himself well. However, Ichigo hesitated. While his normal answer would be to start carelessly destroying the environment until his opponent couldn't hide any longer, Ichigo also knew that Urahara meant it when he said that wanton destruction would result in Ichigo being forced to fix it. So that left alternative methods. Lucky I already know a tracking method. Ichigo focused on the Reiatsu in the air, and materialized the Reiraku, the spirit ribbons. Grasping the one he knew was Hitsugaya's, he smirked. Gotcha. He flickered into Shunpo. Appearing behind the Taicho, Ichigo leapt forward and stabbed with Tensa Zangetsu as Hitsugaya spun around and spoke, apparently having completed his preparations. Senin Hyro. Dozens of ice pillars shot up out of the ground, surrounding them as the icy Taicho lunged to the side, deflecting the stab. So you have a bunch of ice towers circling around us, Ichigo observed as he locked blades against Hitsugaya, Daiguren Hyorinmaru and Tensa Zangetsu shuddering against each other. Just what are they going to do? Simple. Ichigo blinked in shock when a second Hitsugaya stepped out from behind a large rock, outside the range of the towers. They're going to crush you in my ice clone. The Taicho abruptly twisted his wrist 90 degrees, and the pillars zoomed towards him, ready to smash into him from all sides. Ichigo immediately broke off from the ice clone, but the clone lunged at him. Ryuzenka. The clone commanded as it stabbed forwards at its opponent. The wizard flickered out of the way, dashing towards the rapidly diminishing exit, only for the real Hitsugaya to shunpo in front of the exit. Hyoryu B. Zeku, he cried, slashing downward with all his might. This time, the crescent of flowing ice flew from Daiguren Hyorinmaru, rushing at Ichigo. Ichigo had to choose between trying to break through what seemed to be an ice version of his Getsuga, which could easily be a trap, considering Hitsugaya's skill with ice, or dodge and try something else. He chose the latter. Flinging himself to the side, the Transcendent found himself horizontally in the air, rocketing straight for one of the ice columns that was bearing down upon him. Then an idea hit. He released his grip on Tensa Zangetsu and began to spin in the air, black flames racing down the chain and enveloping the blade. When he was within striking distance of the column, Ichigo swung downward on the chain with all the momentum he could muster. Getsuga Tensho. Tensa Zangetsu cleaved the column in half as though it were made of hot butter, the Getsuga promptly obliterating it and giving Ichigo plenty of room to emerge from the ice trap, even as he continued to spin crazily. Managing to slow down his spinning with the airwalk technique long enough to get his bearings and reorient himself, Ichigo called Tensa Zangetsu back to his hand with barely a twitch of the chain, which wrapped itself around his arm. Creative, Hitsugaya commented as he approached, his expression giving off the impression that he was reluctantly impressed. I really thought I had you when I made that ice clone. To be honest, I had no idea you could do that, Ichigo admitted as he lowered tense Zangetsu. It appeared their spar was over for the moment. That'll no doubt be useful. You've got a nice range of abilities. Hitsugaya shook his head. Yes, but I need more practice using them, and combining them with Kido. I should have used a Bakudo to hold you in place while Senenhyro was being set up. A faster binding to prepare for a more powerful one. I rely too much on my Zanpakudo's abilities. Not sure that would have worked on me. Evolved Reiatsu and all that, Ichigo pointed out. True, Hitsugaya mused, but the Togabito likely won't have that. Tell me, Kurosaki, why did you not use any Kido of your own? I don't know that many, and to be honest the Getsuga is stronger than any Hado I know. And I doubt you would fall for Bakudo 1, sigh. Ichigo muttered the last, turning his head away. Nonsense, Hitsugaya barked, startling Ichigo into looking back at him. The Master of Ice looked at Ichigo with hard eyes. My ice is not indestructible, and it has an elemental weakness. Surely by now you have learned Shakuho or Sokatsui. Those are fire element spells, and very effective for disrupting my ice formation. My Bankai relies on water vapor in the air to form its ice. You must have noticed the air becoming drier every time I called on its ice. Remove the vapor in the area by heating the air, and my techniques require more Reiatsu to use, thereby wearing me out faster. You are incredibly strong, Kurosaki Ichigo, and certainly creative with your Getsuga, but one day you will come across an opponent that for whatever reason cannot be crushed with raw power and speed. Come to think of it, you cannot crush hell that way, he will constantly revive. You must learn to properly analyze your opponent's abilities for weaknesses, and then exploit them mercilessly. Ichigo's jaw dropped for a moment before he hung his head. Hitsugaya was right, he usually left analysis as a last resort. Fighting Renji in Soul Society, he had left analyzing Renji's use of Zabumaru until he was bleeding out. Against Byakuya, he hadn't even analyzed the capabilities and drawbacks of his own Bankai until it was too late. There hadn't been any analysis of Aizen's abilities at all when they continued their fight in the real Karakura town, merely comparison of brute strength. That's my standby. Not enough power to outright crush the enemy. Bankai, mask, resurrection, Ichigo criticized himself. You're right, Toshiro, he finally conceded aloud. Hitsugaya huffed, sealing his Bankai back to Shikai, and then into its wholly sealed state. Your turn, Kurosaki. What mistakes did I make during our spar, aside from relying too much on my Zanpakudo? Ichigo thought back through the fight, and nodded. When you surprised me with Raikujokuro from that close, instead of taking an easy stab or slash, injuring me, you backed off and used another ranged technique. You revealed that I was fighting a clone instead of remaining hidden and letting the clone keep me occupied so you could finish your technique without my understanding of what it did. The young Taicho mused on those moments before ascending to the comments. Being overly cautious can be as dangerous as being reckless, he muttered as though reminding himself. And then I let my pride ruin my trap. Anything else? I was able to track your general position through spirit ribbons, Ichigo revealed. You left me alone too long. Hitsugaya raised an eyebrow. Yet if I had attacked you during my preparation, you would have known where I was anyway. Not if you had used your ice dragons and made them circle around to another area before coming at me, Ichigo pointed out. Now the Taicho looked thoughtful. Interesting tactic, thank you, Kurosaki, I will keep that in mind. Now tell me, what has happened to you? You were far stronger and faster when you fought Aizen. When you kicked through my ice wing I should have been crippled at the very least. Ichigo silently sealed his own Bankai and slung Zangetsu back over his shoulder before tugging on his Shihakusho enough to reveal his seals. I was too strong normally to rejoin my body. So Urahara helped me seal my power. I've got about the same amount of Raryoku as I did when we fought Aizen here in the living world. That's a bit humbling, Hitsugaya thought privately. He'd removed his own seal just before challenging Kurosaki, considering it suicidal to not have all his power available to him. I see, I assume you can remove it at any time. Ichigo nodded. He'd never needed to, but it sounded simple enough. Just focus some Raryoku, and Gente Kaijo, right? The 10th Division leader nodded. Good. Allow me be frank, Kurosaki. Hell must not be killed. Even if we find a way to do so, he maintains that Dimension and Soul Society has enough trouble without truly evil souls plaguing it, Hitsugaya admitted. The only way to fix the situation in a semi-permanent way is to seal Hell or shatter his soul once again. If Hell regains enough of his power, he will likely be evolved beyond what any Shinigami can understand. You, Yamamoto Sotaicho, and perhaps Urahara-san, are the only ones strong enough or smart enough to deal with such a situation. Continue your training in Kido, Bakudo especially. We may need a transcendent-powered seal, Hitsugaya ordered. Ichigo swallowed. His diminutive friend made sense, but it was a very tall order. He struggled with learning even the very first Bakudo. How could he ever be able to pull off the complicated and impressive array of bindings that Urahara could manage at a moment's notice? Even so, the mess was, at least partly, his fault. If I hadn't destroyed all those Kushinaga, then Hell wouldn't have risen. It's only right that I help fix it. Ichigo nodded resolutely. Apparently satisfied, Hitsugaya nodded back. Please excuse me, then. I have some training to do. He flickered away before Ichigo could respond, but Ichigo was too preoccupied with the thought of more tortuous, endlessly repetitive, Kido training. It's my own fault, he thought to himself mournfully. If I had been like Kenpachi and never showed an ounce of interest in Kido, he reluctantly trudged back to the ladder leading up to Urahara's shop, preparing to talk to Tessai. Meanwhile, Renji and Rukia were at a nearby lake. It had gotten chilly lately, as winter approached, and while the lake was not yet frozen, it was cold enough that no human was nearby for any reason. Rukia didn't mind at all. Cold was her element, after all. Renji merely flared a bit of his power internally, keeping himself nice and warm. So how do we start, Renji? Renji nodded and began to lecture, crossing his arms together. Bankai, as you already know, has two primary phases: manifestation of your Zanpakuto spirit and establishing dominance. Learning to manifest takes a while, but you want to start in an area that your Zanpakuto will be comfortable in, something similar to your inner world if you can. Rukia cocked her head to the side, confused. Why? Because manifestation can help your relationship with your Zanpakuto, Renji explained. It can be hard to go into your inner world if your emotions are turbulent, but if you can pull your Zanpakuto out to talk every now and then, you learn more about each other. By starting off someplace familiar but new, you can show that you respect your Zanpakuto and want to get closer. He rubbed the back of his neck embarrassedly. Also, it takes a lot less Reiatsu to be someplace they like. And here I thought you were being wise, Rukia deadpanned, a little irked at being reminded of her relatively low reserves. Seriously, though, does this place look like Sota no Shirayuki will like it? First impressions are important, Renji stressed. Rukia took another look around. The lake was almost perfectly still, though not frozen over. The air was cool and brisk, and the nearby trees added to the quiet beauty of the locale. She smiled. Yes, I believe she will. Okay, so what you want to do is activate your Shikai, and ask her if she will allow you to manifest her, Renji went on. Forced manifestation will come later. You need to get used to how it feels when you are working together first. Rukia drew her beautiful sword, spinning it slowly until the end pointed down, and quietly intoned, "Dance, Sota no Shirayuki." The telltale white ribbon fluttered out of the hilt, spiraling around the circle that Rukia had made by spinning her blade as it turned white as snow. Once again, Rukia was struck by the almost ethereally pure beauty of her weapon. "Sota no Shirayuki, would you care to join me out here?" Rukia heard the spirit of her beloved Zanpakuto laugh. Of course, Rukia. Then Rukia felt Shirayuki's Reiatsu rose within her for a few moments before leaking out of her body, coalescing into her own form with a burst of cold air. Sota no Shirayuki manifested as a tall, very pale woman dressed completely in shades of white and ice blue. Garbed in a simple, traditional ivory-hued kimono with a sash possibly the softest shade of blue that Rukia had ever seen, Shirayuki's sleeves extended well past her fingertips, and the kimono flowed down to cover her feet. Her hair was a hue that Rukia still had trouble giving a name to, despite having seen her spirit more than once over the years. It was as though someone had taken the shyest, palest color of lavender they could find, and then given it a shimmery quality that made it seem almost white, without losing that tiny hint of purple. Sota no Shirayuki wore it in a partial bun in the back, allowing most of her hair to fall down to the small of her back. The rest, she kept shorter and framed her face using a pair of dark blue hair clips, but even this hair reached down slightly past her collarbone. Shirayuki's eyes were slightly darker, more of a blue-purple than anything else that Rukia could think of. Her lips, too, were not the healthy pink and red of normal humans, but the color that could be seen if someone crossed purple and pink roses. Renji had to blink and swallow a few times upon witnessing Rukia's Zanpakuto spirit. No wonder her sword is one of the most beautiful, he thought in admiration. Sota no Shirayuki looked around quietly. This is a beautiful place, Rukia. I would dearly like to see it in the full grips of winter. May I? Please, Rukia agreed. The ice spirit almost glided down to the water's edge, somehow not staining her kimono in the slightest despite treading on what must have been soft mud. Then she stepped onto the surface of the water. From where she stood, ice spread and crackled swiftly across the water, and mere seconds later, the lake was completely frozen over. Shirayuki laughed quietly, her voice echoing in the stillness as she began to dance across the ice, gliding and twirling over the frozen water. A snowflake landing on Renji's forehead prompted him to look up, and realize that it had, without warning, started to snow gently down upon the area. Come dance with me, Rukia, Sota no Shirayuki invited. Rukia's smile could not be contained, as she ran down to the lake frozen over by her Zanpakuto's power. Stepping upon the ice, she focused her power to her feet, and she too began to skate across the ice, joining her Zanpakuto in the dance of winter, snowflakes falling down around them both, yet never seeming to touch them. I have longed for this day for a long, long time. Sota no Shirayuki's voice, soft yet clear, carried across the air easily as she almost flew across the ice. For the day you would know the same truth as I do, Rukia, that you are strong, that you are as free as the snow that falls around us. That you may one day achieve Bankai is no longer mere fantasy, Rukia. Have we not been sisters together as we grew, trusted partners in our trials? Yes, Rukia breathed, understanding blossoming within her when she skirted near where Shirayuki was now twirling. You've wanted to reach Bankai as long as I have. Yes, Sota no Shirayuki confirmed with a gentle smile, ending her spin as she now matched Rukia stroke for stroke across the ice. I know how much you care for me, Rukia. Every time you've cleaned me, every time you've admired my beauty, every time you've taken pride in being my wielder, every time you've trusted and relied on me to help in your battles. I admit I felt a little abandoned for a time when we spent so much time without talking, but oh, how my heart glowed when you apologized and asked me to help you once again, how my heart sung when you invited me to join you in using our first dance. Hearing the raw joy in her Zanpakuto's voice was enough to make even Rukia's eyes water. How long had she worried that she was going to mess up her relationship with Sota no Shirayuki, especially after she had been defeated and been forced to give Ichigo her powers, without ever calling on her Zanpakuto to help. After giving up on life in Soul Society before Ichigo rescued her. This was a dream come true, and she owed Renji something big for giving her this opportunity. I am so happy, she let out, slowing to a stop in the middle of the lake to wipe her eyes. Shirayuki gently came to a stop opposite her, a knowing smile on her face as she reached out and cupped Rukia's cheek with her pale fingers. As am I, Rukia. Thank you for being my wielder and dance partner. Know that whatever happens as we strive for Bankai, I will always be glad to be your Zanpakuto. But I will not make it easy. Rukia laughed herself. I would never ask you to, Sota no Shirayuki. I will earn Bankai, and then if you like we can dance again here to celebrate. I'd like that, and with that, Sota no Shirayuki's form dematerialized into hundreds of snowflakes, scattering everywhere as her spirit returned to Rukia's heart. Rukia slowly made her way to an utterly dumbfounded Renji, whose eyes were wide. He'd watched the entire time, entranced by the beauty of Sota no Shirayuki's tall pale form dancing with Rukia, the ice spirit's nearly white hair fluttering in the wind next to Rukia's black, with both of them just moving gaily through the snow, with Renji forgotten in the background. It was a scene he would never, ever forget. Chapter 51. Family Obligations. After his spar with Hitsugaya, Ichigo had gone to Tessai, who agreed to resume teaching him Kido with more emphasis on Bakudo. However, he needed time to recover from the efforts of that day. Breaking into hell was no easy feat. As the Vizard-turned-Arrancar seemed content to train amongst themselves for the moment, Ichigo began walking home in his body, brooding over the lesson he'd learned fighting against Hitsugaya. Strategy, analysis, it reminded him of Aizen, with all his planning and keen plotting. Aizen was a thinking fighter, all right. Ichigo remembered his old archenemy's explanation that he'd engineered most, if not all, of Ichigo's opportunities and motivations to grow. What would you do here? As it stood, Ichigo felt rather helpless. His mother and sister were still dead and trapped, bound by the chains of hell. While he probably had the power to break them, it'd be for nothing if they stayed dead. Well, doubly dead for Mom, he corrected himself. I just have to get them into hell, wait for them to revive, and then free them. But Ichigo didn't know how he was going to manage that. Hell, the creator of the dimension, was tied to them in ways he didn't understand. No matter how Ichigo got his family into that damned plane, hell would probably detect them, and prevent Ichigo from freeing them. So hell has to be dealt with first, he concluded, with a pang in his heart. So why aren't we invading hell right now? Cazador demanded. Now, when he's weak and recovering. Because we don't have a way to keep him down, Ichigo answered wearily. We can't just kill him, or the dimension is destroyed, and Soul Society has enough problems without having to accept the evil souls too. Then we must wait, Zangetsu stated solemnly. We are not skilled enough in sealing to create a new seal for hell, nor do we have the records on how the Spirit King shattered hell's soul. All we can do is train, and be ready when a solution is prepared. It sucked, but Ichigo knew his Zanpakuto spoke the truth. The next priority after hell was doing whatever it took to keep anyone else in Soul Society from having the bright idea of using his family against him. If only there was a way to constantly keep them under. Wait. Hell built a dimension. Why can't we? Then everyone could stay there. A haven. Ichigo felt Zangetsu shift within his soul. As loath as I am to say it, Ichigo, our strength is not yet sufficient to do such a thing. You require more power, more control, and more knowledge. Then we have our next goal, Ichigo decided, his brows furrowed. Control and knowledge first. Those coincide with what we need to deal with hell. We'll figure out power later. A sudden spike of Reiatsu broke Ichigo free from such thoughts. He had reached his own house, but next door there was. Ichigo rubbed his eyes disbelievingly. Suddenly erect around the neighbor's house was what could only be a Kido barrier that shimmered through the colors of the rainbow. That's, Ichigo stammered for a moment before letting loose a disgusted sigh. Damn it, just when I was looking to rest for the night. The substitute Shinigami approached the barrier and knocked politely, if none too gently. The barrier let out a low gong-like sound, and Ichigo waited a few moments for a reply. Then a stern-looking Shinigami with blue-black hair and long gray gloves came out of the house and approached the barrier. He appeared stunned for a moment, seeing Ichigo. You can see me. Obviously, Ichigo commented, his tone somewhere between sarcastic and dry. I'm Kurosaki Ichigo, and you are. Oh, I apologize, Kurosaki-sama, for not recognizing you earlier. The man exclaimed, dipping into a quick and polite bow. I am Kenzuki Ryusei, loyal servant of the Kasumioji family. Please call me Kenryu. What can I do for you? Kasumioji, Ichigo, they are a noble family who came up in our investigation. They specialize in weapons manufacturing. Ichigo silently acknowledged his Zanpakuto's information. I'll try to make this quick, and I'm sorry if I'm a bit short, it's been a long day, Ichigo started. But frankly, what are you doing in Karakura? The Kasumioji are a noble family, right? Don't you have your own manor? Kenryu grimaced, looking a put little on the spot. I'm afraid that is business private to the Kasumioji. Bullshit, Ichigo interrupted. This is Karakura, and you are in the house right next to mine. You have to have known that no noble family would act without trying to find all the information. I can only think of 3 reasons why someone would move right next to me and put what seems to be a high-level barrier to block the way. Ichigo put up his fingers, ticking them off as he listed the reasons. First, they want to finish what the Barin family started and threaten my family to control me. Second, They want close access to kill me because there's a contract on my head. Or finally, they need me nearby to help with something. Ichigo shook his head. So tell me what's going on, or I'm taking my family and just getting out of town. It was a bluff, of course, but there was no need to tell that to Kenryu. No, the servant exclaimed before he could stop himself. Then he hung his head. You're right. We chose this house and quickly bought it from their original owners because we hoped that being so near to you would give us extra protection. Protection against what? Ichigo pressed. And for whom? For the leader of the Kasumioji, Kenryu answered, defeated. Kasumioji Rurochio. Someone is trying to kill her. Ichigo palmed his face in exasperation. Fine, let me in so I don't look like an idiot talking to thin air. Kenryu made a difficult-looking hand sign, and a man-sized hole in the barrier opened, allowing the wizard to come inside. They entered the house, where they were silently greeted by a tall, muscular man with sunglasses and a small mohawk in the shape of a lightning bolt. It's okay, Kenryu assured him. This is Kurosaki Ichigo. Enryu nodded shortly, but did not relax much as he followed them into what was obviously a meeting room, complete with a small table to sit Caesar style at. Ichigo raised an eyebrow. Very loyal bodyguard, he mused. The three of them sat at the table, and Ichigo decided to open the conversation after a few moments of silence. So, who's trying to kill Rurochio? He asked bluntly, and shouldn't she be a part of this conversation? Kenryu frowned. Please address Rurochio-sama with respect, Kurosaki-sama. But no, she is, unaware that she is being targeted. Ichigo snorted. How's that? Enryu made several strange hand signs, as though wildly miming what he wanted to say. Kenryu nodded in apparent agreement and turned back to Ichigo. Enryu says that it's our duty as her servants to make it easier for her to lead the Kasumioji without worry. We are her guardians, as she is still young. She believes we are currently taking a small vacation. What about her parents? Her mother died during childbirth, Kenryu replied sadly. Her father recently passed away due to illness, though we are uncertain if that illness was engineered or not. We suspect it was. So what makes you think that someone's after her? Once again, Enryu began making his strange sign language that only Kenryu seemed to understand. Enryu says that assassins have been sent after her more than once. We narrowly escaped one today, even. Enryu nodded enthusiastically. Okay, hard to argue with that, fine. Any idea who, or why? The two bodyguards exchanged a dark look. Kumoi Gyokaku, Kenryu revealed darkly. A clan leader of the Kasumioji. He is easily the second in command of the Kasumioji, and we are sure that he wants to rule it. Wait, let me get this straight. Ichigo stood up and looked at the two servants disbelievingly. She's being attacked. You know who's doing it, you know why he's doing it, you know where he's usually going to be, so why haven't you just dealt with him? Kill him, seal him, imprison him, something. It's not that easy, Kenryu contradicted. We have no proof. While we have the skills to escape the assassins, we are sadly not strong enough to defeat and capture them. Without their testimony, we have no evidence that Kumoi is responsible, and if we dispatch him, then the family will fall apart. He is too well known. Enryu made several more signs, ending with pointing at Ichigo. Kenryu nodded. He says that that's why we escaped to the living world. We are trying to escape the assassination attempts until we can gather the evidence needed. Can we count on you to help protect her? Ichigo sighed and sat down at the table again, weighing his options. I need most of my attention on the threat of hell invading. There's no way to know when it'll happen, and if I'm busy with this then I might miss a crucial chance to slip in with Mom and Yuzu, get them resurrected, and then cut off their chains. Or someone else might die because I was distracted. On the other hand, he admitted, it could really come in handy for another noble family to owe me. It lends me and mine support, and I need to think long term. When Mom isn't bound by hell anymore, she'll still be a dead, purified soul. She'll still need to reside in soul society. If this works out, then she could stay with the Kasumioji, with the protection of Shinigami and politics. After a few tense moments, Ichigo decided that while he could, if it came down to it, invade hell forcefully after it was all over, he couldn't constantly be there for his mother. So he nodded. Fine, I can help out. So, the plan is to wait for an assassin, capture him, then use him to expose Kumoi. The pair of guardians looked at each other again, relief obvious on both their face. Yes, Kenryu confirmed. Then all we need to do is bait a trap. Enryu frowned and made more of his strange sign language. How so? The assassin is after Rurochio, right? So we expose her, give the assassin an opportunity. I'll be nearby, undetectable. When the assassin arrives, I knock him out from behind, Ichigo suggested. Kenryu shook his head. Unacceptable. I know of your strength and skill, Kurosaki Ichigo, but these assassins have strange powers, strange enough that Rurochio-sama may be taken before you could stop them. Both Enryu and I have attained Shikai, and even when we work together it is not enough to defeat a single assassin. You must not underestimate them. Ichigo grimaced. What strange powers have you encountered so far? One man could dissolve entirely into mist that would surround the area. Then he would materialize randomly inside. He seemed impossible to hit, Kenryu described. It was all we could do to get away from that one, and he was the one who chased us here into the living world. Point taken, Ichigo conceded. Our barrier obfuscates our Reiatsu signatures, making it more difficult to track us, as well as providing a first line of defense, Kenryu told their guest. So long as we stay within it, we're reasonably safe. He rubbed the back of his head, looking sheepish. But as we're theoretically on vacation, Rurochio-sama will want to go outside and explore. Something about the phrasing made Ichigo frown. Rurochio sounded young. But who knew how old she really was, or where that stood in terms of how grown up she was? Rukia was at least a century old, yet she could easily pass as a human 15-year-old physically and mentally. It got even more complicated, as Rukia had explained that spirits with more Raryoku naturally lived longer, since Raryoku was literally a spirit's life force. Ichigo opened his mouth to ask how mature she was, but shut it with a snap. That was certainly not something to ask a noble family that he wanted himself endeared to. He grimaced. In other words, there was no way to know what to expect until he saw the leader of the Kasumioji. Instead, he sighed and decided to be completely honest. It's better than them thinking I'm at their beck and call. How much do you know of what's going on outside of the Kasumioji? Not much, Kenryu admitted. We've been somewhat occupied with internal politics and evading assassins. Ichigo shook his head. Here's the short version. You know the dimension, hell. Turns out it was named for the creator, and he was revived not long ago. Hell, the person, not the dimension, is supposedly this extra-dimensional warlord who tried to conquer the worlds a long time ago. So, Ichigo scratched the back of his head, not sure how to continue. Well, basically Hell's probably going to try again. So I literally can't be here all the time. The Gote 13 needs my power to fight the Togabito, hellbound souls, I mean. You might be better off making this place a stronghold and telling Rurochio the truth. Enryu and Kenryu shared worried glances. We'll need to discuss this, the more vocal of the two responded after several seconds. We'll contact you tomorrow, or the next day at the latest. Allow me to escort you out. Meanwhile, Renji and Rukia were still out by the lake, though now the situations were reversed. Rukia was the teacher, and Renji the student. Rukia had quickly had her friend demonstrate the most powerful Kido he was comfortable with casting. Renji, your Hado 31, Shakuho is imperfect, Rukia scolded. I'm astounded it didn't blow up your face, with the amount of power you just shoved into it. I know, Renji replied miserably. Kido is my worst subject. And it does blow up every now and then. I haven't really worked on it since my days at the academy. Remember, I was first taken by the 5th, but Aizen moved me to the 11th after seeing my aptitude at swordsmanship, and then I was only recently brought to the 6th division. Rukia sighed. All right then. The biggest issue is your control. Cast it again, with the full incantation his time, and focus on using less power. Renji brought up his arms once more, putting his left hand on his right bicep as though to brace himself. Ye Lord, mask of blood and flesh, all creation, flutter of wings, ye who bears the name of man. Inferno and pandemonium, the sea barrier surges, march on to the south. Hado 31, Shakuho. This time, the red orb that materialized in front of Renji's open palm, while large, was obviously more manageable, and he shot it into the still mostly frozen lake, where it carved a large hole that was slowly filling with melted ice. Renji himself looked surprised. That felt a lot better, even better than when I was doing that without having gained Bankai. When do you usually resort to Kido? Rukia queried, intrigued. Well, until recently I didn't really use it. Remember, 11th Division, Renji reminded. If I need destructive power, I have Bankai. And my control's been too shoddy for Bakudo. Rukia sighed. Well, we're going to have to fix that. Your Bankai uses your Reiatsu to hold Hihio Zabumaru's segments together, correct? Better control means you need less Reiatsu to maintain it. And with better control, you could use Bakudo to hold your opponent in place for your Bankai to smash or blast. Renji's eyes widened. He hadn't thought of that. Alright, where do we start? The ice user shook her head amusedly. Renji always was one to get fired up when he finally understood how useful something could be, or if it appealed to his urge to blow things up. Rukia moved closer and clasped one of Renji's hands in hers. Do you trust me? Renji looked at his best friend, memories flashing through his head from their time in the Rukongai, their separation in the academy, their reconciliation after Aizen deserted. Always, he replied quietly. Rukia nodded, molding the power that gently emanated around Renji's hand with her own. It was more difficult than simply working with her own power, but that was to be expected, as she was manipulating Renji's Raryoku, his very life force. Hado 31. Shakuho. He didn't flinch, but instead stared at the large, calm, crimson orb that now hovered over their joined hands. His power was part of it, he could feel it as though he'd cast it himself. Do you feel it? Rukia murmured. The stability. Yes, and Renji could. The Kido was very stable. Rukia could hold it as long as she had power to supply it, he was sure. Can you feel how your Raryoku is being molded? Yes. Good. Now, slowly take control of the spell from me. I'm going to loosen my will, and I need you to pick up the slack, Renji. Renji nodded determinedly. Rukia began to relax her spiritual grip on the Shakuho, and it slowly started to shrink and give off dangerous wisps of explosive energy without a constant source of power and will, until Renji fed it some of his Raryoku and, with some effort, stabilized it. They repeated the process 3 more times, until Rukia gently moved her hand away from Renji's. Now, Renji, that's all you. Renji smiled tightly. Maintaining such a perfect Shakuho was very hard on his concentration. So, it becomes an exercise in control? He asked through gritted teeth, not angry, just very focused. Exactly. Hold the spell as long as you can. When you know you can't hold it any longer, or if you've held it for an hour, fire it, Rukia ordered, moving to a nearby tree and sitting down against it. Why an hour? At some point your mind will figure out how to multitask the concentration needed for Kido, and the awareness needed for battle. When you can hold it for an hour, you should be skilled enough to hold a decent conversation with me without strain. Renji nodded. This is a lot harder than what I had you do, he thought bitingly. But he immediately regretted it. The path to Bankai is not easy, Rukia. Looks like we're both going to be suffering, just in different ways. He refocused on the orb then, determined to make it last as long as possible. Ishida Ryu entered his apartment with narrowed eyes, deep in contemplative thought. He'd gotten most of the story from Urahara upon his return, but he was uncertain on what it meant for him. He looked to his right, where another sewing project, a coat designed for the fairer sex, was unfinished. He had meant to finish it and attempt to sell it to see where he stood in terms of skill. But Ishida did not see the coat. He saw past it, to where his Quincy uniform was neatly displayed on a mannequin. In Ishida's mind rang the words of his vow, to stop involving himself in spiritual matters. I swear, on the pride of the Quincy, that unless it is to save a life, or to maintain my skills, I will not use my Quincy powers. I further swear that after the current crisis is over, I will focus my energies on living my life as any other non-spiritually aware human would. And yet, the minions of hell cannot truly die. They are constantly brought back. Would a Quincy arrow destroy them? Or would they resurrect even then? Is hell the key to finding a way around our arrows annihilating souls? Either way, this was an opportunity. If Ishida were to participate, then either the Quincy would do what the Shinigami could not and destroy the invading forces once and for all, safeguarding Karakura, or the Quincy would find a way to equalize them by making his arrows purify rather than destroy. But, the vow. Ishida shook his head and moved to his bedroom, sitting down on his bed silently. The crisis he'd spoken of during the vow had come and gone. Aizen was dead. The only loophole was the, to save a life, clause he'd put in, but was that not dishonorable, to resume his training as a Quincy when he knew that there were so many other reasons behind why he wanted to do so? He wanted to not be powerless, he wanted another chance to prove the strength and usefulness of the Quincy, he wanted to resume his rivalry with Kurosaki, he wanted. Ishida lowered his head and closed his eyes, removing his glasses absently with his right hand to pinch the bridge of his nose with his left. I want to help my friends. I don't want them to fight alone. But I swore on the pride of the Quincy. I knew this was going to happen someday. In exchange for the power to aid them against Aizen, I swore I would cease my involvement in with spirits. If I break my vow just because I want to, then my word becomes meaningless. My pride would shatter. But, my friends, my nakama, how can I abandon them when they are about to face hell itself? Ishida buried his face in his hands. More than ever, he wished his grandfather, Soken, the man who had trained him as a child in the Quincy arts, was still alive and well. And once again he cursed the name of Kuretsuchi Mayuri, the Shinigami Taicho who had arranged for Soken's death simply to dissect his spirit and study the soul of a Quincy. Tell me, grandfather, what should I do? Ichigo entered his own house with a sigh, his mind on the many things that had happened, and what needed to be done. Ichigo, the tense voice of his sister spoke. He turned at the sound, looking towards the couch, where Karen sat. She was almost rigidly tense, her hands clasped on her knees with a grip that shook with intensity. But Ichigo knew better than to ask. They both knew. Masaki and Yuzu were bound by hell's chains. And if Ichigo couldn't free them, not only would Yuzu die, but then they were both in for an eternity of torment. Karen, Ichigo acknowledged, moving to sit across from her, in one of the chairs. They were both silent for a few seconds as Karen struggled to figure out how to say what she wanted. You can set them free, right? Ichigo nodded. I broke a chain or two while fighting the guys who took you. I can break the chains, Karen, but I don't know what will happen when I do. What do you think will happen? Karen sounded, not desperate, not calm, but some bizarre combination of hopeful and scared. I want to say that Yuzu will revive, and Mom will be able to go back to Soul Society. But hell, Ichigo shook his head. You know better than most just how evil the hell dimension is. What can I do to help? Karen demanded more animatedly. You're going to stay next to me, Ichigo's father's voice sounded from the door leading to the family clinic. Isshin was once more in human form, but he looked dead serious. Karen, the fight is going to be brought here to Karakura. Souls that have been in torment for thousands of years, souls that crave to inflict violence and death upon those blessed enough not to be damned, they will be coming. Then let me fight, Karen argued, standing. I've been fighting hollows for months. You couldn't handle the Togabito who kidnapped you and your sister, Isshin reminded. And I will not have you kidnapped again. Karen sat back down, cowed by her father's words. Ichigo nodded appreciatively. That was one less thing to worry about. If Karen's with Dad, then her protection's pretty much guaranteed. Dad, Ichigo, Isshin interrupted, you need to focus on your Bakudo. I know, Ichigo acknowledged. Toshiro explained it to me. Transcendent level seal, right. Right, we have another problem. Ichigo quickly explained what he knew of the Kasumioji situation. If we can help them, then they'll owe us one. We can have them look out for Mom when everything's over. Isshin nodded. Good plan, but you want to get it resolved sooner rather than later. They're basically civilians in what's going to be another war. Talk to Yamamoto. No, better yet, talk to Kuchiki Byakuya. He's both a noble and a Taicho, so he should know any loopholes you can use. Karen sat quietly, watching her brother and father make plans for the immediate and not so immediate future. It was one of the few times they had ever treated each other with such seriousness and respect, working together as adults, but neither seemed uncomfortable with it. I don't understand. How have things changed so quickly? She stared harder, knowing that something was just on the edge of her perception. She pushed, and then Karen could see them, if only just. There was a translucent, almost transparent, image around Ichigo, and another around Isshin. When Karen was able to focus directly on Isshin's over-image, the illusion overtook the reality, and she saw Isshin in his Shinigami robes rather than his human clothes, with a white haori tied around his shoulder. A sword was strapped to his side, and it positively burned with tightly controlled power. And Karen understood. Isshin is not just my father, he is also a powerful Shinigami. Things haven't really changed for him, more that he is reassuming an old role. Karen turned her eyes of startling insight to Ichigo, and her eyes widened as she saw Ichigo in his Bankai coat, with one eye a bloody red with blue sclera. There was something else, something just beyond her sight, attached to his chest. But Karen could suddenly feel the weight of his Reiatsu upon her, a great, looming presence that positively screamed of tenseness and stress, that warned in no uncertain terms not to provoke him or else be crushed. And just as before, Karen understood. Ichigo's dead serious because he feels he can't afford not to be. He is stressed and needs someone to be on his side, to help in some way because he feels overwhelmed and ready to snap. How do I know these things? Why am I seeing them like this? Karen had no idea, and the only idea she had both excited and scared her. My powers growing too. Karen knew she'd always been sensitive to spirits, much like Ichigo had been before he became a Shinigami. She'd ignored them as best she could, seeing how Ichigo had been plagued by spirits night and day, but ever since that incident with the crocodile housing the spirit of Shubata Yuichi, she had begun to have infrequent flashes, for lack of a better word. Karen had attributed it to growing older and wiser when every so often she suddenly had very good ideas on the emotions of those around her. It didn't happen often, so she thought little of it, but now. Is this power of mine, spiritual? Ichigo nodded then, dragging Karen from her thoughts. It's decided, then. I'll be staying at Urahara's to maximize my time learning Bakudo. Karen will stay home with you and help out in the clinic. You make the necessary excuses at our schools. Isshin nodded as well. Right. Neither of them missed how Karen merely nodded her assent as they turned to look at her, or how she quietly made her way back up to the room she normally shared with Yuzu. Son. Ichigo turned to his father. Yes, Dad. I want you to know. I think you've grown into a fine young man. And you have my support, Ichigo, whenever you need me. For anything. Isshin's eyes were earnest, honest. Ichigo swallowed the lump that had suddenly appeared in his throat. I know that, Dad. I'm sorry I wasn't able to rescue them in time. And I'm sorry I wasn't home to protect your sisters, Isshin apologized. Is that why you didn't call on me to help invade hell? What? No, Ichigo denied vehemently. I didn't call on you because you're needed here. You're a doctor, someone who saves lives. If you had come to hell with me, you wouldn't have been here. None of us, not me, not Mom, not Karen, not Yuzu, not even you, would have been able to deal with their salvation costing the life of someone else. So I made the choice, to protect you from it. So if I chose wrong, you wouldn't have the burden. Without warning, Isshin pulled Ichigo into a bear hug. Damn it, Ichigo, you're not supposed to be this wise yet. Soon I really won't have anything left to teach you. His voice was throaty, as though fighting back some powerful emotion. Ichigo wrapped his arms around his father's torso. When that happens, Dad, we'll learn the rest together, right? They separated, and Isshin gave a solid nod. Right, he affirmed strongly. Now let's get some shut-eye. It's been a long day, and there's a lot to do tomorrow. Chapter 52, Promises to Protect. Fire surrounded Ichigo and his opponent as they circled each other slowly, probing for holes in each other's defenses. The wizard clenched Tensei-Zangetsu tightly in his hand, his eyes not leaving those of his enemy. How does it feel, Kurosaki Ichigo, to have failed everyone you love? Hell asked wickedly, an evil grin stretching his face. Even better, how does it feel to be the instrument of their demise? What are you talking about? Ichigo spat, refusing to let Hell get a rise out of him. I think you know, Hell teased. Your mother died because you were weak. And then you grew strong, so strong that you could be felt across dimensions. But even with all that power, she and your sister were bound to me. Because you were still weak. I will get them back. Ichigo swore. You're a little late for that, Kurosaki Ichigo, Hell replied condescendingly. Oh, yes, I forgot. You have such difficulty remembering what happens when you lose control. After I took them back, you lost control again. You cut through hundreds, thousands of my minions, but then, that's no great loss. They will spawn again in my dimension sooner or later. But you also cut through everyone who tried to stop you and make you see reason. He gestured outside the fire, and Ichigo could not help but look. Ichigo gasped. His father was lying there, his eyes devoid of life. His chest appeared to be carved through, as though by a Getsuga Tensho. Ichigo's eyes slowly turned away, only to fixate on another figure, Rukia, whose head was separated from her body, apparently cut cleanly in a single slice. Sota no Shirayuki lay on the ground next to her, the once pure white blade now snapped in half, tarnished with dirt and Rukia's blood. Tears rebelliously welled up in his eyes, and Ichigo let out a grief-stricken half-sob half-whimper. Then a sound got his attention. Hoping desperately that it was Inoue to reject the damage, to try to bring back Isshin and Rukia, Ichigo spun towards it. But he was to be disappointed. Only meters away was Renji, his body covered in burns and blood. He was on the ground, weakly trying to crawl to Rukia's side, tears running down his tattooed face. In his hand he clutched the bone fragment of his Bankai, the tail of Hahio Zabumaru. That was all that remained of his once impressive Bankai. Beyond Renji, Ichigo's eyes caught on a flash of white. Ishida. Refocusing through the tears, Ichigo took a clear look at the white that had blurred in his watery gaze. Ishida hung lifelessly from a burning tree, held up by a length of chains that had evidently snapped his neck. Familiar-looking chains. Ichigo couldn't help but glance at Tensa Zangetsu's hilt, and sure enough part of the chain was missing. No, I did this. Horrified and fighting the urge to fall to his knees, Ichigo looked the other way, and fought not to gag. Chad had fallen, his arms ripped off and lying on either side of him. He still struggled to stand, blood pouring from his shoulders. But he was still alive. And Inoue was next to him. Ichigo opened his mouth to call out to her, to beg her to hurry, but his voice stuck in his throat when he saw her sobbing on her knees, clutching at something. A hint of blue caught his eye, and Ichigo recognized her hairpins, irreparably shattered, now powerless and unable to heal their friends. And then a terrifyingly familiar voice came out of the fire from behind Hell. Tell me, Ichigo-kun. Aizen walked out, calm as could be, and stood beside Hell with a knowing smile on his face. Was it worth it? Oh, why bother asking him? Hell commented idly, raising his hand in the air and grasping something invisible. Let's ask his dark side. Ichigo felt something in his chest tighten, and then a chain connecting him to Hell materialized as he felt his hollow powers begin to rise against his will. No, not again. Tensa Zangetsu, Cazador. He was suddenly cut off as he began to hack and cough, fighting, despairing as white fluid tore its way out of his mouth to form the mask of Resurrection. No, no. Ichigo sat up wide-eyed and gasping in bed, sweat pouring from what felt like every inch of his body. He had barely even thought it before Zangetsu materialized in his hands, ready in Shikai form. It was just a nightmare, it was just a nightmare, it was just a nightmare, he chanted to himself. They're all alive, they're okay, they're alive. But just to feel better, he quickly extended his senses and found each of his friends and family. They were all alive and apparently resting peacefully. Still breathing hard, Ichigo wiped the sweat off his brow and checked the time. It was only 2:43 a.m. After that nightmare, he didn't dare try again to sleep. This is what I get for trying to sleep when I'm not exhausted, he berated himself. Ichigo grabbed the badge and practically slammed it against his chest, exiting his body with ease. It was only moments later that he leapt out the window and into the night. Knowing there was no chance of him getting any more sleep that night, Ichigo stretched and began to make his way to the nearby forest. Might as well go practice my Bakudo. He quickly found a secluded part of the forest, and landed. A moment of concentration later, Cazador de la Luna stood in front of Ichigo, looking more than a little disgruntled. Really, Ichigo, you want to practice the one Bakudo you know on me? Over and over, for hours. Ichigo shrugged. I'm kind of lacking in other test subjects at the moment. You're just afraid to go back to sleep. Cazador accused. You have Bakudo training in the morning. Tell me you're not afraid of returning to that. Nightmare isn't a strong enough word for it. Ichigo retorted without thinking. Tell me that you weren't just as horrified as I was. Everyone dead at our hands. Aizen back and working with hell. Us bound to hell as his slave of mass destruction. Of course I was, Ichigo. Cazador yelled back. I'm part of you. I'm your instinct, remember. Your instinct to protect is part of me. The idea that we could be the one to kill them repulses me, it makes me want to puke. But you can't run away from this. You are stronger than this, Ichigo. He is right, Ichigo. Abandon your fear. With a snarl, Ichigo materialized Zangetsu's spirit next to his inner hollow. Can you blame me for not wanting to sleep, knowing that if I do I'll be returning to that? Zangetsu's expression did not change in the slightest. The nightmare is a product of your fears. You lost control in hell. You fear that in the coming conflicts, you will enter hell and lose control again. You're damn right, I'm afraid of that. So do what you must to ensure it doesn't happen, Zangetsu commanded sternly. How? Ichigo demanded. I wasn't supposed to lose control that time either, not since I gained control of Resurrection. How was hell able to mess with our very soul? You weren't prepared for it, Cazador told him bluntly. I was asleep in your soul, and wasn't able to minimize the influence hell had over you. Now, between Zangetsu and me, you should be fine. Oh, great, and what happens if I need to use Resurrection against hell? Cazador shifted uneasily. That's what I thought. Ichigo shot back angrily, before he sat down against a tree. Fine, I'll just have to do without. Cazador, I'm counting on you to suppress our hollow powers if and when we enter hell again. The inner hollow gave a mock salute. Aye, Captain. Ichigo turned to his Zanpakuto spirit. Do you have any control over my dreams? Very little. At best, I may enter them as a spirit and alert your dream self to the situation. This may provoke a state of lucid dreaming. I'll take it. We'll see how it works tomorrow night. Right now I'm too awake to try. Zangetsu merely nodded before dissipating. Ichigo turned to the manifestation of his instinct. In the meantime, time to train to take out hell as quickly as possible. Cazador sighed, then perked up. Let's try to make things interesting, Ichigo. You'll be using Bakudo while you're in Bankai, probably masked, right? Yeah, so practice in that state, and I'll give you a moving target. Ichigo saw no problem with that. Fine, but only Jillian masked for now. I want to get the hang of how my hollow power affects Bakudo before I have to deal with the instinct. Bankai, quickly drawing his Jillian mask, he gathered his power. Bakudo 1. Sigh. The spell promptly blew up in his face, lightly charring the mask. Cazador immediately fell to the ground laughing. Oh, do it again. Shut it. A few hours later, Ichigo called a halt to their training and descended back down to the clearing. Cazador joined him a moment later before disappearing into Reishi and rejoining the rest of Ichigo's soul. Ichigo was beginning to get the hang of casting with the mask, though his spells still blew up in his face every now and then from being outrageously overpowered. I guess this is what Renji feels like. And I don't even have my full power available to me, he complained to himself, suddenly realizing that he had a lot of work to do. This is going to take years. Perhaps not. Recall that higher-level bindings require more power, and as Hachigan said when you first began training with the Vizard, more power merely strengthens bindings of a high enough level. So you're saying it might be easier for me to learn higher-level Bakudo once I have the basics mastered. It seems like a logical conclusion, Ichigo. Ichigo sighed. Suppose there's no way to know until I talk to Tessai and Hachi. He glanced up at the sky. They're probably awake by now. Let's go get this thing started. He was about to shunpo, when his spiritual sense flickered. Ishida was coming towards him quickly. Wonder what he wants. A few moments later, Ishida landed on the ground a few feet from his rival. Kurosaki. Ishida, what's wrong? Ishida shook his head, as though trying to clear it. I wish to discuss a private matter with you, and I would prefer you to keep it to yourself. Ichigo blinked, taken aback. Sure, Ishida, but why me? I can predict what Sato and Orihime would tell me, and I don't really have anyone else. I want to know what you would do in my situation. Now Ichigo was worried. What? Did you get a girl pregnant or something? What? Ishida looked shocked, then irritated. Kurosaki, I would not. Sorry. Ichigo interrupted, backtracking. Remember, I live with my father, at a small clinic, where he sometimes has to deal with teenage pregnancies. I hear things. Ah, yes, right, of course, Ishida stammered for a second, before taking another breath and apparently finding his train of thought. This looks like it might be a long conversation. Sit, he invited, picking one of the nearby logs and getting comfortable. Ishida did the same. So, what's going on? Ishida's voice fell quiet for several seconds. Well, again, he fell silent. His expression grew more and more frustrated, until he suddenly got up, and threw his hands in the air. Forget it, Kurosaki. This was a stupid idea. No, wait, Ichigo contradicted, lunging forward and grabbing Ishida's wrist. This is one of those emotional things that are hard to put to words, right? They're not supposed to be easy to talk about. But you came to me because you had to talk to someone, right? So sit down, figure it out, and tell me. The archer gave Ichigo an inscrutable expression for a moment before taking his seat. Ichigo sat back down as well, satisfied. You're more perceptive than you look, Kurosaki. Oi, Ishida ignored him. But you're right. But where to begin? I usually find the beginning works well, Ichigo pointed out dryly. Ishida nodded. Are you aware of the terms of my vow? Ichigo furrowed his brow in thought. The one about using your Quincy powers. Yes, that one. You didn't really go into detail. You just said you weren't allowed to use them anymore. It boils down to this. In exchange for the training I needed, I swore to my father, on my Quincy pride, that after the crisis with Aizen was over that I would not use my powers except to maintain my skills, and to save a life, Ishida explained. I swore to try to live as a normal human without powers. Ichigo nodded. Seems fairly straightforward so far. However, Karakura is about to enter a crisis that could eclipse that of Aizen Sosuke, Ishida reminded him. And I want to help. But that would break my vow, would it not? The Transcendent frowned. That depends on how loosely you interpret it, I think. Ishida waved his hand agitatedly. Yes, I know. If I interpret my help with the crisis as possibly saving my life, or that of anyone else, then I'm free to act. But I feel like that would be dishonest, as it was very clear that my father meant for me to use my Quincy abilities only when it was absolutely clear that there was no other way to save a life. He wanted me to discontinue any association with the spiritual unless absolutely necessary. And frankly, I don't see how it is. You have a number of powerful Shinigami here, as well as the Vizard, training and ready to fight Hell and his minions. Ichigo's frown deepened. He could see Ishida's point. But there are so many possibilities. Ishida continued. Urahara-san said that the Togabito are reborn again in Hell when they're killed. Would a Quincy arrow change that? The Vizard's eyes widened. He had no idea. If it did, it would change the game entirely, he breathed. It'd take away Hell's advantage completely. It'd change an unending onslaught into a fight with finite foes to vanquish, Ishida finished. Or, imagine what happens if it doesn't. That means that somehow, Hell has found a way to make it so a Quincy arrow does not destroy souls. If that were the case, we could find out how and make my grandfather's dream come to life. Quincy and Shinigami working together, without souls needlessly being destroyed. I could restore the Quincy without fear of having another Quincy massacre. His hand clenched. I could one day have children and teach them how to defend themselves and others from hollows, without wondering if one day the Shinigami will decide to complete the extermination. Ichigo was very glad he was sitting down. His legs suddenly felt very weak. He'd had no idea that Ishida had thought that far ahead in the future, and the hardest part was that he could now utterly understand Ishida's fears. If I ever have children, they'd be the children of a transcended human Shinigami hollow hybrid, Zangetsu finished. They would almost assuredly have the ability to see spirits from a young age as you did, Ichigo. And they too would likely have their own dormant Shinigami capabilities. After all, you inherited yours from your father. Of course they'd be a threat. Or maybe Soul Society'd use them against ya. Who knows? Oh Kami, Ichigo's throat was suddenly very dry. The archer noticed and nodded. Yes, all that is possible, but only if I break my word, Ishida replied bitterly. So tell me, Kurosaki, what would you do in my situation? Do I sit on my hands and pray that you and your allies successfully eliminate the threat without anyone dying? Or do I break the vow I swore on my Quincy pride, take up my bow and make a difference? I see. Both Ichigo and Ishida spun towards the forest, where Ishida Rukin stepped out from the shadows. The elder Quincy gazed steadily at Ichigo, who stared back without flinching. I followed my son here after I felt his use of Herenkyaku to this location. I had expected to find him training, disregarding his vow as a child might. The younger Ishida clenched his fists in fury, his glasses glinting as his head bowed slightly. I swore, did I not? I swore on my Quincy pride. I would not dishonor myself so. Rukin turned his eyes to his son. No, Oryu, not without just cause, it would seem. He paused for a brief moment. I must admit, I was surprised to hear you begin to understand why I would have you cease your spiritual activities. Like it or not, Oryu, you are my son. The time of the Quincy has passed, and I have no desire to see you executed for the sake of world balance. Oryu pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, making them flash momentarily. This is our chance. We can change everything now, and make Soken's dream, your father's dream, into reality. Possibly, Rukin conceded, and even if such does not prove the case, you would be saving the Shinigami much hardship. In doing so, they would be better able to protect Karakura. And as a result, you would indirectly be helping to save lives. And directly saving lives, Oryu pointed out with narrowed eyes. Protecting the lives of those the Togabito will attack. Rukin's expression did not change, but he fell silent. Ichigo remained quiet, feeling that somehow that conversation had narrowed itself to just the two remaining Quincy's. Release me from my vow, Oryu pleaded. Allow me this chance. Without it, I will always wonder if maybe, just maybe, I could have made a difference. For whom? Rukin questioned coldly. The younger Ishida bowed his head. For anyone who dies before hell is conquered once more, Oryu answered quietly. For any future children I may have. And, for myself. Explain. Oryu raised his gaze to meet that of his father's. Like it or not, Rukin, I am a Quincy, he stated firmly, echoing the elder's statement to him. And the Quincy were born to protect ourselves and others from spiritual threats. I am a guardian of Karakura. He extended his arms to either side, gesturing to the forest and beyond. So much of who I am is tied to the spiritual. I have fought and bled for my nakama. I have risked death in having my spirit consumed for them, and they for me. Their consciences cannot allow them to sit back and let others protect their town, their friends, their families. I need to fight alongside them. Let me protect those to whom I have entrusted my soul. The silence was profound for a few minutes, and neither Ishida looked away from each other. Then Rukin scoffed and turned on his heel. Do as you wish, Oryu. I release you from your vow. But, he turned sideways and stared piercingly at his son. I still expect you to explore mortal life. Do not seclude yourself entirely in the afterlife. Oryu merely nodded. Rukin nodded in return, then turned and walked away. Suddenly remembering that Ichigo had been there before Rukin had interrupted, Oryu spun around and prepared to recover his composure. It seems, Kurosaki. But Ichigo was gone. He's probably just hiding. Not an issue, I'll just sense him. Damn it, I can't find him. What the hell, he's not that good at controlling his Raryoku. A vein on Yuryu's forehead throbbed and the Quincy's left hand shook with irritation. Damn you, Kurosaki, he flashed away with Herenkyaku. Ichigo didn't move from his hiding spot within the thick foliage of a nearby tree. Well, it seems that issue's resolved. Ishida's back in the fight. He nodded to himself. That's good. I hope he finds a way to make his arrows purify, rather than destroy. He got up and took to the air, heading to Urahara's. Time to do my part. A few minutes later, Ichigo arrived at the shopkeeper's. He reached out to knock, but the door opened before he could. Come in, Ichigo-kun, Urahara invited. The wizard entered, and his attention was immediately caught by Tessai and Hachi standing together, looking at him with expressions that made shivers crawl down Ichigo's spine. I think I'm in trouble. You should feel honored, Ichigo-kun, Urahara commented easily. Not many people have the privilege to be tutored by the Taicho and Fukuteicho of the Kido Corps. Ichigo swallowed. Oh yeah, I'm in trouble. I'm going to be in a lot of pain, aren't I? Looks like. The school bell rang, and Inoue glanced around. Ichigo hadn't arrived. She sighed. Kurosaki-kun is probably training again. Ms. Ochi stood in front of the class, a sorrowful look in her eyes. Attention, please. It seems that Kurosaki Ichigo was shot yesterday, and there were complications in removing the bullet. As a result, he is bedridden and unable to attend class for the time being. He is being cared for by his father and sisters at the Kurosaki clinic, but they have requested only Ichigo's close friends visit. As one, all eyes turned to Chad. Someone had eavesdropped on the conversation Chad and Ichigo had had with Ms. Ochi upon their return to school, and the story that Ichigo had saved Chad from some gang had spread like wildfire. So, naturally, everyone now thought that Ichigo had been shot in retaliation. Chad's expression didn't change. I will be visiting him today after class, he announced. I will pass on your well wishes. Inoue sighed again. Definitely training again. Poor Kurosaki-kun, he doesn't get a break. Oi, Orihime, Tatsuki whispered. Is he, working? Yes, the redhead confirmed, noting that Keigo and Mizuhiro were listening in as well. What can we do to help? Keigo asked. Inoue was taken aback by the question. I'm not sure how you can, actually, she admitted, turning to Chad for help. The giant of a man shook his head. Sorry. The three of them hung their heads. I hate this, Tatsuki swore quietly. Being so powerless, Mizuhiro muttered under his breath. Yes, the martial artist confirmed emphatically. Chad and Inoue exchanged significant glances. Urahara had told them and Ishida the new location of the Hogyoku after they had nearly panicked about it shortly following Aizen's demise. At the same time, he had entrusted them with the knowledge of the truth about the Hogyoku's powers, and shared his theory that it was the reason they had developed their powers so quickly. Flashback. Sato-san, Inoue-san, I believe your powers were born from a number of factors, Urahara explained. You have each been attacked by hollows and survived, which gave your souls the potential. You spent quite some time with Ichigo-kun regularly, especially after he was given Shinigami powers, developing your spiritual awareness. You each cursed being powerless to protect those around you. And those heartfelt desires interacted with the Hogyoku that I had implanted into Kuchiki Rukia's Gigai, allowing you to seemingly spontaneously sprout your powers. But why are you telling us this? Ishida asked pointedly. Ichigo-kun has a lot on his plate, Urahara admitted. I want you to keep an eye out for those who show signs of following in your footsteps. Why? Chad questioned suspiciously. Not to force powers on them. The shopkeeper denied quickly. To keep track of them. They will attract hollows, and they will probably, at some point, gain powers of their own with or without my help. It would be a lot easier on them, and us, if we were prepared for it. End flashback. Inoue was beginning to feel more worried than before. She didn't want Tatsuki and the others involved. It was dangerous, more dangerous than when she'd gotten herself involved. And this time we don't have the grace period for them to get comfortable with their powers, she fretted. Hell itself is going to invade. Chad, too, quietly worried. Am I strong enough to help Ichigo? Memories of his defeat at the hands of Ulquiorra ran through his mind. No, I'm not. I need to get stronger. But, how? He looked at his hands. My left arm holds my enjoyment of battle. My right holds my will to protect. I don't think they can evolve any further right now. So, what other emotion do I take strength in? Chad reached up and gently grabbed the special coin he wore on a necklace every day. It was the old Mexican coin, the coin his abuelo had given to him. That coin had become a symbol of the promise he'd given his abuelo, to use his strength to protect. Chad rubbed the coin mindlessly, but suddenly stopped, realizing his answer. Promises. I have pride in my word. I promised abuelo I would fight to protect. I promised Ichigo I would have his back, and he mine. He closed his eyes. There was a special emotion he associated with those promises that would last a lifetime. It was the feeling that no matter what happened, he absolutely had to keep those promises, or else lose himself. Chad knew in his heart what the word for that emotion was. Duty. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.